At 3:19 local time, the central Red Sea, 160 nautical miles north of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, is operating in a state of darkness so complete that the only way to describe it accurately is to note what is absent. No moon, no ambient glow from any coastline within sensor range, no commercial traffic within 12 nautical miles, and approximately the level of natural visibility that allows a 2-meter surface object moving at 18 knots to cross 4 nautical miles of open water without being detected by a human eyeball looking for it. The sea state is 1.5 meters, which is not smooth, but is not the kind of rough that produces the surface return clutter that would complicate a radar picture. And the radar picture at 0319 is therefore operating at its designed capacity rather than a degraded one. Everything that can be detected is being detected. The question is whether everything that is moving has been acquired yet. USS Bataan, hull number LHA-6, an America-class amphibious warship, is making 12 knots on a transit track southeast toward the Bab el-Mandeb. She is 844 feet long. She displaces approximately 45,000 tons fully loaded. She carries in her aviation spaces a mixed composition that on this deployment includes F-35B Lightning II short takeoff/vertical landing fighters, AV-8B Harriers as secondary complement, MV-22 Osprey tiltrotters, and a collection of rotary wing aircraft that includes the CH-53E Super Stallion heavy lift helicopters and UH-1Y Venom utility platforms. She is, in the vocabulary of naval power projection, not a carrier. She is also not a carrier. She is the specific platform that allows the United States Marine Corps to show up places with fixed-wing combat aircraft and vertical landing, and a flight deck, and a well deck, and a hospital, and approximately 1,800 Marines, which is its own category of capability, and one that the Houthi targeting cell in Sana'a had been paying attention to for 4 months. On the bridge, the officer of the deck is managing a picture that has been quiet for 6 hours. Not the absence of noise quiet of a routine transit, but the practiced attentiveness of a watch section that has been briefed on the specific threat category that this body of water has been adding to its repertoire over the past 6 months. The Red Sea is not a venue for casual watchstanding at 0319, and nobody aboard USS Bataan has been conducting casual watchstanding since the ship entered the southern Red Sea. The bridge team watches the radar. The radar watches the water. The water is, at 3:19, beginning to offer something worth watching. Here is what the surface search radar at 0319 was looking at, and what made it, in the specific vocabulary of a watch section that had been briefed on exactly this, operationally significant. Small contacts, not 1, not 2. 6 contacts in a loose arc formation range approximately 4.2 nautical miles on the ship's port quarter, behind and to the left, moving at 18 knots on a bearing that the radar's track processing resolved. In the 11 seconds between the first acquisition and the 4th refresh, as an intercept course with USS Bataan's current track. Small contacts at 18 knots in a formation at 0319 in the Red Sea are not fishing boats. Fishing boats at 319 in this part of the Red Sea are at anchor or are not fishing boats. The contacts were not at anchor. They were making 18 knots. They were in formation. They had appeared, not from a direction consistent with a coastal departure, but from a bearing consistent with prepositioned assets that had been waiting in a holding area on a low-power drift profile that the surface search radar's minimum detection threshold had not acquired until the assets accelerated. The Houthi Maritime surface drone program is, in its current operational configuration, less documented than the aerial drone program and considerably less discussed. This is partly because the maritime surface drone is newer, partly because the instances of its operational employment have been fewer and less publicly confirmed, and partly because a surface vehicle moving at 18 knots in the dark across a relatively flat sea surface produces a radar return that is smaller and more ambiguous than a Shahed 136 in flight, and ambiguous returns in the Red Sea at 0319 do not always generate immediate international reporting. The program exists. The vehicles exist. They are assessed at approximately 3 to 4 meters in length, capable of 18 to 22 knots, with a payload capacity consistent with a 60 to 80 kilogram warhead, and with guidance that combines GPS waypoint navigation and terminal electro-optical or radar homing. They are, in the threat taxonomy of the Red Sea, relatively new, and relatively new means that the engagement procedures for them have been developed more recently and with less operational testing than the procedures for aerial drones and anti-ship missiles. The watch section had been briefed on them. The specific contacts, now at 4.2 nautical miles and closing at 18 knots, were consistent with the threat description in that brief. Here is the vulnerability that made the next 14 minutes operationally uncomfortable. USS Bataan's F-35B detachment, the two aircraft currently designated for quick reaction alert, had both been down for scheduled maintenance since 2300, when a hydraulic system inspection on the lead aircraft had revealed a fitting that the maintenance team was addressing. The inspection had been scheduled for 2200 and had run long, as hydraulic inspections sometimes do when the fitting requires more attention than the initial assessment suggested. The maintenance officer had briefed the commanding officer at 2245 that both alert aircraft would be unavailable until approximately 5:30. The commanding officer had noted this, assessed the overnight threat picture, and determined that the risk was acceptable given the escort destroyer's surface and air coverage. This was a reasonable professional judgment at 2245, with the threat picture available at 2245. The threat picture at 0319 contained 6 surface contacts at 4.2 nautical miles that had not been in any threat picture before 0318. Both F-35Bs were in the hangar. The alert posture that the threat picture at 319 was now calling for was not available in the form it had been designed to be available. What was available? The ship's Phalanx CIWS systems, 2 mounts, port and starboard, both fully operational. The Mk 38 25mm chain gun on the port bridge wing, operated by a gun crew that had been at their station since 0200 as part of the enhanced night watch posture. The escort destroyer from the amphibious ready group, USS Sampson, currently 12 nautical miles to the northeast, which had been notified at 0319 simultaneously with the commanding officer's notification and was already making 29 knots toward the contact bearing. 12 nautical miles at 29 knots, approximately 25 minutes. The contacts were at 4.2 nautical miles at 0319 and making 18 knots toward a ship making 12 knots. Closure rate, approximately 30 knots combined. Time to minimum engagement range, approximately 8 minutes. 8 minutes. USS Sampson, 25 minutes. The commanding officer was on the bridge at 321. He had the contact picture, the F-35B maintenance status, the CIWS posture, the Mk-38 status, and the Sampson's ETA in the time it took him to receive 4 briefings simultaneously from 4 officers who had each prepared their portion of the situational picture for exactly this moment. He looked at the geometry. He looked at the tools available. He made 2 decisions in the time it takes to make 2 decisions when the 8-minute clock is running. All ahead flank. Come right 3 to 5 degrees. CIWS weapons free on all surface contacts inside 3 nautical miles. Mk-38 crew cleared to engage on my command at 2 nautical miles. All ahead, flank on USS Bataan, approximately 22 knots. The course change to the right opened the angle between the ship's track and the contact's approach bearing, which extended the time before the contacts reached minimum engagement range. At 22 knots, the ship was now moving faster than the contacts, and the diverging course added additional separation rate beyond the speed differential. The geometry was changing in the ship's favor. Not resolved, the contacts were inside 4 nautical miles and the Phalanx had acquisition, but improving. At the moment the commanding officer gave the orders, the closure rate dropped from 30 knots to approximately 18, and the time to minimum engagement range extended from 8 minutes to approximately 13. Short sentences. Because the clock had restarted and 13 minutes is not the same as 8, the Phalanx CIWS, 2 mounts. The close-in weapons system on USS Bataan is configured for surface, air, and anti-ship missile threats, and the surface threat engagement mode is the capability that has been in the system since the CIWS was updated to handle the small boat threat environment that the Persian Gulf and Red Sea have been developing over the past decade. Against an 18-knot surface vehicle, at 3 nautical miles, the Phalanx's surface mode engagement solution is clean. The target speed is slow relative to the system's tracking capability. Its radar cross-section is small but consistent, and its straight-line approach at a known bearing provides a tracking geometry that the system describes in the vocabulary of automated tracking systems as straightforward. CIWS has acquired all 6 contacts, the combat systems officer reported. Surface mode. Firing solutions valid on contacts 1 through 4. Contacts 5 and 6 are at the formation's trailing edge. Acquisition is solid, but firing geometry currently has contacts 3 and 4 in the engagement corridor. Hold fire until contacts inside 2.5 nautical miles. Then engage 2.5 nautical miles. The contacts were at 3.4 nautical miles, 90 seconds at the current closure rate, 3:23 and 40 seconds. Lead contact 2.5 nautical miles, bearing 315. CIWS Mount 1, port forward, engaged. System's 20mm rotary cannon cycled at 4,500 rounds per minute in the specific 2 to 3 second burst that the engagement mode uses against surface targets, which is the burst length that balances ammunition conservation against the lethality requirement for a contact of this size and speed. The burst duration is approximately 2 seconds. 2 seconds of 20mm fire at 4,500 rounds per minute against a 3-meter fiberglass and composite hull moving at 18 knots produces an outcome that the operational after-action report describes as neutralized, which is what it describes when the contact ceases to produce a radar return at a range consistent with structural integrity. Contact 1, neutralized at 3:23 and 43 seconds. Contact 2, neutralized at 3:24 and 11 seconds. Contact 3, neutralized at 03:24 and 31 seconds. The 4th contact performed a course alteration at 03:24 and 12 seconds, a 19-degree turn to port, which the system's surface mode tracking interpreted as a terminal guidance acquisition maneuver, which it was, and which changed the target's geometry relative to the CIWS mount's current aiming solution, which required a reacquisition that the mount completed in 1.1 seconds before engaging. Contact 4, neutralized at 3:24 and 57 seconds. Contacts 5 and 6 had separated during the engagement of contacts 1 through 4, with contact 6 breaking north and contact 5 continuing on the original approach bearing. The Mk-38 25mm chain gun on the port bridge wing, operated by a 3-person crew who had been watching the contact picture on their ballistic fire control display since 0320, engaged contact 5 at 1.9 nautical miles. The Mk-38 is not the Phalanx. It is a manually aimed weapon system operated by people rather than by automation, and the people operating it had been trained, briefed, and had been watching the contact approach for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Contact 5 was not a difficult engagement. At 1.9 nautical miles against an 18-knot target in calm water, the Mk-38 crew was not in a condition that produces difficult shots. Contact 5 neutralized at 3:25 and 22 seconds. Contact 6 had broken north and was making a circuit that, from the track data, suggested a terminal guidance system attempting to reacquire USS Bataan from a different bearing after losing the approach vector. USS Sampson, now at 8 nautical miles and converging at 29 knots, had the contact on its SPY-1D. The Arleigh Burke's tactical action officer had a firing solution on contact 6 from the moment it broke north. Sampson, Bataan. Contact 6 bearing north. Range 4 miles from your position. Cleared to engage. Contact 6. USS Sampson CIWS engaged at 0328 and 14 seconds at 1.8 nautical miles. Total time from first acquisition to final contact neutralized, 9 minutes and 14 seconds. The F-35B maintenance window had 4 hours remaining. Now, the intelligence picture from 9 minutes and 14 seconds of contact. The 6 contacts had been transmitting since they accelerated at approximately 3:18. The acceleration itself, from drift hold profile to 18 knots, had been the acquisition event that the surface search radar had caught at 0319. Before the acceleration, the contacts had been in a holding area at very low power, drifting at approximately 1 to 2 knots on a pattern that produced a radar return below the surface search radar's standard acquisition threshold in the sea state present. This was the deployment concept. Pre-position in international waters at very low speed on a profile that minimizes radar detectability, then accelerate at a pre-programmed time from a GPS reference position. The acceleration signature was in the surface search radar's track data from the moment of acquisition. The speed profile from drift to 18 knots took approximately 40 seconds, which told the technical intelligence community something specific about the propulsion system's acceleration curve, a characteristic that had not been documented from operational contacts before, because the previous engagements with Houthi surface drones had involved contacts that were acquired after they had already reached operating speed. This was the first engagement where the acceleration phase had been captured in the radar track data, and the 40-second ramp-up was a propulsion characterization data point. The terminal guidance behavior of Contact 4, the 19-degree course alteration at 2.4 nautical miles, was the most operationally interesting piece of the collection. Contact 4 had altered course based on a reacquisition cue after the lead contacts were engaged, which meant its terminal guidance had active input at close range that was processing engagement of preceding contacts as information for its own course selection. This was behavioral intelligence about the drone's terminal guidance logic that went beyond what the technical intelligence community had been able to infer from previous non-engagement contacts. The guidance system was not purely pre-programmed. It had at least some capacity to respond to environmental inputs in the terminal phase. The electronic support measures had been recording since 319. The contacts' GPS receivers were transmitting on commercial GPS frequencies, not military-grade GNSS, the same commercial architecture as the Shahed 136 aerial drones, subject to the same jamming considerations, but operating in a frequency band where the maritime propagation environment produced stronger signals at surface level than at altitude. The ESM suite had collected the GPS receiver's signatures from all 6 contacts, which would allow the contacts to be cross-referenced against the commercial GPS receiver supply chain that the intelligence community had been tracking since the aerial drone program was identified. Were these the same commercial receivers as the aerial drones? Different batch, different supplier. The supply chain question was not answerable from tonight's data alone, but tonight's data was a contribution to the answer. What did we learn that we didn't know? The commanding officer asked the intelligence officer at 5:30, when both officers were awake, and the F-35B alert aircraft were back at readiness and the sun was 40 minutes from the horizon. 3 things, sir. The acceleration curve, 40 seconds from drift to 18 knots. That's a propulsion characterization we didn't have. The terminal guidance response, contact 4's course alteration, at 2.4 miles, suggest active terminal homing rather than purely pre-programmed. And the GPS receiver signatures, which are going to the supply chain analysis cell for comparison against the aerial drone program's components. A pause. We also have the holding area position from the acceleration point, the GPS fix on where they pre-positioned. That's a planning intelligence piece. A holding area position? Yes, sir. They pre-positioned approximately 14 nautical miles west-northwest of the transit lane in international waters. The holding profile was consistent with commercial vessel drift, very low speed, minimal emissions. They were waiting. The intelligence officer looked at his notes. If the sea state had been higher, the surface search radar's minimum detection threshold would have been higher, and the acquisition might have been later. The calm sea state worked in our favor tonight. The commanding officer noted this. He noted it in the way that commanding officers note things that go into the recommendation for the next ship's force protection brief before it transits this section of the Red Sea. The holding area position would be in the transit threat brief within 48 hours. The acceleration curve would be in the surface drone threat library update within 72 hours. The terminal guidance behavior assessment would take longer. The analyst community needed to model the contact 4 course alteration against existing terminal guidance architectures before they could characterize what it implied. But it was in the queue, marked with the priority notation, that operational engagement data receives. The Houthi Maritime surface drone program had spent 6 platforms attempting to reach USS Bataan. The 6 platforms had been neutralized by 2 CIWS mounts and a 25-millimeter gun crew. The engagement had revealed the propulsion acceleration curve, the terminal guidance active response behavior, the GPS receiver signature, and the pre-positioning concept of operations, specifically that the program uses a drift hold profile below radar detection threshold before accelerating at a programmed time. This is the specific intelligence value of engaging a new threat system in its early deployment phase. The first engagements are simultaneously the defense of the target and the technical characterization of the system. The target survives. The characterization accrues. The next ship that transits this water has a better brief than the previous one. Al-Masirah television, at 11 o'clock local time, broadcast a statement from the armed forces of Yemen. The naval forces had conducted a successful maritime operation against an American amphibious warship in the Red Sea, deploying advanced naval systems in a significant escalation of the maritime campaign against forces supporting Zionist aggression. The broadcast described the operation as a demonstration of the armed forces' expanding operational reach and technical development. A spokesperson confirmed that the operation had successfully targeted the American vessel. The footage available was limited. The drone program's BDA capability is constrained in the same way as the aerial drone programs, which is to say it ends at launch, and what happened after the drones accelerated at 3:18 was not available to the camera systems that could have documented it. USS Bataan's deck log for the period read 0319 to 0328, 6 surface contacts, assessed Houthi maritime surface drones, intercept course, range 4.2 nautical miles at acquisition, speed 18 knots. CIWS engaged contacts 1 through 4 at 2.5 nautical miles, 0323 to 0324. MK-38 engaged contact 5 at 1.9 nautical miles, 0325. USS Sampson CIWS engaged contact 6 at 1.8 nautical miles, 0328. All 6 contacts neutralized. No hull damage. No personnel losses. Intelligence package transmitted 5th Fleet 415. The intelligence annex was 5 pages. Page 4 was the terminal guidance behavioral assessment. Page 5 was the holding area position with coordinates and drift profile analysis. Both reports described the same 9 minutes and 14 seconds. One describes a successful maritime operation. The other describes what success cost and what it taught. Both accounts will be cited in operational planning documents this week. Only one of them will improve the next ship's odds. Bye for now.